All right, people. Welcome to Fun Film Facts. But we're going to start this little film with a question that I used to get asked when I worked for Kodak Professional. I would show up to give a talk, and there was the same guy that would show up every single time and sit in the front row. He's an old guy. And he would ask the most asinine questions in an attempt to stump the Kodak guy, me. The question that was my all-time favorite was, at which temperature does film emulsion turn to vinegar? And I'm going to answer you the same way I answered him. I looked straight at him, got very close, and I said, I don't care. All right, people, this is a bit of a change up today. Again, this is called Fun Film Facts, but I know that some of you are very sensitive about this film thing. So the word facts, if it makes you feel better, you can use alternative facts, because then you can continue to believe whatever you want. So I thought this would be interesting. I grew up in the film era, wet darkroom era, loved it, enjoyed it, very much glad that I grew up in that era, came to be a photographer in that era as opposed to the digital era, which I like, very different thing. But I thought it would be fun to look at some of the weirdness around film that I was able to experience as a Kodak person and as a photographer. And of course, I've got a handy little list of points that we're going to go over. And some of these are questions. There's no way for you to answer me, but I'm going to ask it and then I'm going to delay, and you can stop the film and see if you can guess. And don't cheat and Google it, because that's lame. Some of you are kind of sensitive because I innocently, and I've talked about this before, I innocently made a comment about box speed, and I created this storm of rage from people who were like, by God, what do you mean I'm not going to shoot at box speed? That's blasphemy. I'm going to continue to shoot at box speed. You can. I don't really care what you do. But I figured the safest thing to do would be to avoid all conversations about box speed. But then I thought, well, that's not fun. So we're going to start with box speed. Point number one. This is not even a point. It is whatever you want it to be. You can shoot at the box speed. It's okay. No one is coming to stop you. But you shouldn't if you want good negatives, or transparencies for that matter. For those of you crazy enough, for some reason, for whatever reason you can come up with, to still be shooting transparency. Okay, I'm just going to name a few of the films that are not true to the box speed. Just a few. And I'm only going to stay with Kodak. Not talking Fuji or Ilford or any other brand. I'm just going to talk about Kodak. TriX, both 35 and 120, and I mean both versions of the film. The 35 and the 120, but then there was a second version of the 120 that was specific for retouchers. Neither of those were true to box speed. Plus X, 125, not true to box speed. Let's talk TMAX, 100, 400, and especially the 3200, not true to box speed. TechPan wasn't a 50, sorry. Panatomic X wasn't true to box speed. Ectopress, the full range, remember the Ectopress? Those were such cool ads in like late 80s, early 90s, or maybe it was mid 90s. Kodak came out with this Ectopress, and it was like their edgy photographic documentary wire service film, and their advertising was cool. The advertising looked great. I was not a huge fan of the film. 100, 400, I can't remember what other speeds. I think there was an 800 or a 1600. Guess what? None of them true to box speed. Let's see here. The entire Kodacolor family. Every film, every flavor, every color, every speed, every version of this globally, not true to box speed. Let's talk transparency. EPN, not true. EPP, EPR, oh, EPR was Ektachrome 64. A gorgeous, gorgeous film. There were celebrity portrait people in LA at the time that specialized celebrity portraits, very famous photographers. A couple of them off the top of my head, I remember shot EPR, and their work was absolutely gorgeous. Not true to box speed. It was not a 64. If you didn't shoot it at least 50, it was going to come out under. How about Kodachrome? 64? Nope. 25? Nope. Especially the 200? Nope. Not true to speed. We're going to talk about that film a little bit more in a minute. How about the Portrait family of color negative, which is what all the hipsters love now? 160, NC, VC, 400, NC, VC. How about the UC version? Guess what? Not true to box speed. Not even close. New guys in LA, we're going to talk more about this in a minute too, about the pushing ability of that film and the overexposure ability. How about Ektachrome E200? No, it wasn't true to box speed. It was a film designed to be pushed. Ektachrome 64T, 160T, and 320T. Yes, Kodak made tungsten-specific films. Bet you didn't know that, some of you out there, film hipsters. They did, and guess what? None of them were true to box speed. The one film that I can remember that was darn close to box speed, and I spent 4 years pushing this film to people based on the fact that you could shoot it at 100, was E100 VS, Vivid Saturation. This was Kodak's attempt to battle the dominance of Velvia at the time. Fuji Velvia was a great film. Fuji makes great film. Ilford makes great film. Agfa made great film. Everybody made great stuff. Fuji had a dominance in the market in certain genres. Take, for example, the surf industry. The surf industry, when I stumbled upon it, meeting a photographer named Art Brewer, who's an unbelievable photographer and just a really cool guy. That whole industry was Fuji Velvia. All the magazines would mandate that photographers, if they were submitting, had to shoot Velvia. But Velvia had limitations. It was not a true 50 speed. You had to shoot it at 40. And when you're shooting action, a 40 speed film is very limiting. But where Velvia looked good, there was nothing that could touch it. Kodak comes along and says, we can build a Velvia with T-grain at 100 speed and rival that film. And we did. And we actually ended up over about a 2 or 3 year time frame or time span gaining quite a bit of market share in that particular industry, because all of a sudden we had a film that was twice the speed with a teeny weeny bit more grain, but it was just a more usable film. Velvia was still an amazing thing, but again, E100 you could shoot at 100, and that's about the only thing I remember true to the box speed. Don't you love that? Don't you love all this handy information? I can see some of you out there like making voodoo dolls and going in the chat rooms. And remember, if you're talking about any of this film stuff, film has taken on a mythical proportion in the consumer, prosumer, online, and amateur communities. It's mythical. It's not in the professional industry. Pros do not talk about this. Pros are about getting work, getting paid, and building a career and an archive. That's what sometimes if you're talking in like the art space, you might be able to get something about somebody's process out of them, but it's never the front and center conversation. So if you're even having these conversations, it means most likely that you're a consumer, prosumer, or you're in the online space where people have fabricated this entire industry around the mythical abilities of film. And again, trust me, I love film. I don't use it much anymore because the logistics of it don't work for my job. I love film. I still think in a huge percentage of situations, film looks as good or better than digital. And I think it has advantages over digital, but digital for most pros is the name of the game because they're about getting work, getting paid, building a career, building an archive, moving quickly and efficiently through jobs, and the logistics of film is where things get slowed down. All right, let's move on. This is point number 2, which happens to come in the form of a question. What's the most color accurate film of all time? Go ahead and hit the pause button and start thinking, because I bet 99.9% of you have no idea, and you've probably never even heard of this film, and I can almost guarantee that 99.9% of you have never shot it, because this film was designed pre-digital. If you're running a clothing company, let's say you're L&L Bean, and you've got a catalog, and you've got 17 shirts that are different versions of green. Each one of those has to be accurately represented in a photograph, otherwise people are going to return the goods because the green doesn't match. So you had to have a film for copying artwork, museum work, and for color accuracy. This film looked horrible. It was one of the ugliest films. If you threw it on a light box next to any other film at the time, E6, K14, whatever you wanted, it would look terrible. And people would look at it and say, that's the ugliest film I've ever seen. And I would say it is, but that's also the most accurate film. All of these other films have dyes and couplers and everything that have thrown the saturation and the vividness of film off the charts. The film that I am referring to is EPN, Kodak Ektachrome 100. They haven't made it for a long time. Most of you probably have never heard of it. And again, for good reason. There's no reason to really use this film unless you were looking for an ugly film. And who am I to stop you? If you want to make butt ugly work, I'm okay with that. I have no problem with it. In fact, I kind of want to see that because everything now is so photoshopped and overly perfected. If I see another 20-something shooting in the Grand Tetons and photoshopping 17 stills together to make the light do things it doesn't do in the natural world, in the actual world, I'm going to throw up. I might throw up anyway. but I've got a balcony door right here. I can make it outside, no problem. Okay, third point, second question. What film could be pushed to 500, causing a color shift that would alleviate the need to gel your lens and your filter to compensate for fluorescent lighting? Oh, that was a mouthful. What film could be pushed to 500 that would alleviate the need for putting a magenta filter on the lens and a green gel on your strobe to compensate for fluorescent lighting? And for those of you wondering what the heck I'm talking about, anyone who worked in the news industry, anyone who shot transparency, any photojournalist that ended up having to shoot in mixed lighting conditions knew that you always had to have a magenta filter for every single lens you had, and you had to have a green gel to put over your strobe so that if you found yourself stuck in a fluorescent lighting situation shooting daylight film, you had to compensate and balance for the color of the light. This was done on the fly very quickly. There were assignments where you were taking these things on and off nonstop. It was absolutely maddening, but there was one film that alleviated the need to do it. The problem with this film is that you could not get it processed quickly. You could often not get it processed locally. It was very expensive, and it was also very grainy. Another hint, it was referred to as color TriX. Does anyone know? Go ahead, hit the pause button. Go ahead, I dare you to hit the pause button. Go ahead, keep thinking. Someone out there, friends of mine will know this. Old people will know this. That film, my friends and family and rage-filled few, was Kodachrome 200, my all-time favorite color film. This stuff was gorgeous. It was color TriX. And by the way, I think we're going to talk a little more about Kodak in here. Oh yeah, we are. I've got a whole point about this coming up here. Stay tuned, hold your breath. If you're still here, give yourself a medal. Give yourself a pat on the back. Okay, question number 3. Point 4, question 3. What machine causes fogged film at the airport when you're going to travel with film? What machine will put basically a weird like X-shaped pattern through your film if you run it through this? Typically it's not inside the airport, although I have seen a few inside airports and big international airports. I think Amsterdam may have one. Most of the time, for check bags. You put film in a check bag, for the most part it's toast. This film, the answer is CTX 5000. This machine's been around for a long time. You definitely don't want to put it through there. So here's what I do when I travel with film. I use lead bags. I strip the film out of all the film packaging so that it's easy, you can see it through clear Ziploc bags. Double Ziploc bags, film out of the packaging, inside lead bags, and I go early, and I am incredibly polite, and I'm incredibly patient, because you're going to show up and they're going to say, you don't get a hand inspection. We have to run your film through. By law, you are given the right to a hand inspection. But most of the time, TSA is not well trained when it comes to film, and they don't know, and they don't really want to hassle. So put yourself in their shoes and you realize, okay, this job is not easy. People are pissed off, they're angry, they're in a hurry, you know, people who travel all the time. You know who I'm talking about. And so the TSA people are like, look, I just don't want to deal with this, run it through. But you're supposed to get a hand inspection. So you go early and you go polite. The cool part of this is that a lot of TSA people, even though they're not related to photography, there is a romance about film still. And when people see film, they're often like, wow, you're still shooting film. That's so cool. Why would you do that? And it develops a little conversation, which you can then utilize to help them make the hand inspection. There are certain countries in the world where this does not work. If you're an American flying back from some European countries, France, I've had problems. Switzerland, my family's from Switzerland, and I've had problems there. I've been accused, I've been called names, I've been threatened by TSA people in Europe, both in France and Switzerland, and told I was never going to get on the plane if I didn't x-ray my film. These are just angry people. There's not much you can do about it. That's why you have the lead bags. So if you have to run it through, and here's the funny part, oftentimes they'll run your film through in a lead bag and they can't see it. So then you end up having to do a hand inspection anyway. It makes no sense. Don't ask me. Don't ask me to explain these things, people. I don't know. How could I be so good at chemistry and suck so bad at math? I don't know, but it's a fact. Okay. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. Question 4.5. What Kodak film was dominating the market long after it should have been, and a film that every other brand tried to copy but never could? There was a Kodak film that dominated the market. Even Kodak couldn't figure out why it was dominating. Kodak didn't want it to dominate, but it was dominating, and everybody tried to clone it. There was another brand that tried really hard to clone it because they were getting their butts kicked because this film was being used so much. They sent teams from other countries into Los Angeles when I worked there to meet with photographers who were using this mystery film to see if they could build something that was better. And they built a film that came out with, and they spent probably millions of dollars marketing the fact that this film was out and it was a replacement for this Kodak film. And guess what? It wasn't. It was not a film that latched on. No one really loved it. People used it, but they were like, it's okay, but it's not as good. The mystery film, can you guess? Also not true to box speed, by the way, Kodak EPP, Ektachrome 100 Plus. This was a dog of a film. It was not fast, it was not sharp, it was not fine-grained. There was nothing about this film that was good, except the combination of the parts made it beautiful. It had the best skin tone of any transparency film I've ever seen. You couldn't push it, you couldn't pull it, it was limited. It was a dog with fleas, people. And guess what? Even though our dogs have fleas, we still love them, and people loved EPP. Other films and other brands came along, they tried to match it. They never could because the technology was so old. It was fantastic. And I loved every minute of that. I just loved knowing the ends at which people would go to try to replace this ancient dog with fleas. Okay, let's talk TMAX. This is not a question. This is point 6. TMAX versus TriX. TMAX, think of TMAX family of films as an actor or a professional athlete. High maintenance, rude, they can perform at an incredibly high level, but to get to that performance level, everyone around them is going to suffer. That's how I view TMAX. TriX is your roommate in college. TriX is Brad Pitt in True Romance, taking bong hits out of a honey bear honey jar. That's what TriX is. TriX is your buddy, it's your pal. It hangs out with you, it sleeps on the couch. TriX can do anything. TriX can drink a case of beer. TriX can do no wrong. It's easy. You can put it in the developer and go to spring break and come back and it will still be printable. TMAX, not so much. But if you have your system dialed and you have your processing and exposure in particular, if you block up a TMAX film, you are done. It is virtually impossible to print in the wet darkroom. But if you nail your exposure and you nail your process with TMAX, it is T-grain, much finer grain. It is an absolutely gorgeous platform for black and white photography. I used the TMAX 3200 for years. That was my primary film for about a decade. And I could shoot it anywhere from about 1,000 to 6,400, and I had the processing and the exposure and the chemistry down to do that. It took a lot of extensive testing and also testing with the lab that I was using in LA, Photo Impact with Don Weinstein, fantastic lab in LA. Anyway, that's how I feel about TriX and TMAX. One is not better, they're just different. And who doesn't like your roommate Carl or Floyd, whatever his name is? Okay, a lot of talk, not really, no talk anymore about Kodachrome. But Kodachrome, this is point 7, I think. Kodachrome was a K14, the last process in the Kodachrome line was called K14. And here's the interesting thing about K14. Kodachrome had no direct integral color couplers in the film. Let me repeat that. There were no integral color couplers in the film, which was unlike any other color film. Plus, Kodachrome was a silver-based film. There were silver particles in it. All of the color in the Kodak process was installed and injected into the film during the process. And 14-step process. And I have it on my phone if you want me to, let me see if I still have it. Let me see here, people. I just pulled this for you guys earlier, and then I thought, I'm looking at U-Haul trailers too, which is not gonna help you guys here. I don't think you're gonna wanna know this. All right, let's see here. Steps, process. Oh man, did I blow this? K14 process. Let's see, steps. I'm just going to read through these very quickly. Backing removal, first developer, wash, red light, re-exposure through the base, cyan developer, wash, blue light re-exposure from the top, yellow developer, wash, magenta developer, wash, conditioner, bleach, fix, wash, rinse, dry. That's why K14 went away. That's why it was so hard to get done. That's why there were so few locations. Even more remote fact, Kodak built a K14 processor in the back of a Winnebago. Think Walter White, think Breaking Bad, but instead of processing meth, they were processing K14. How do I know? Because I covered the Super Bowl in whatever, 1998 in San Diego. I don't even remember who played. And that was in the parking lot. And photographers could shoot Kodachrome during the Super Bowl, Kodachrome 200, and they could then have it processed. Crazy, I know. Amazing that Kodak went out of business, huh? Not really. Not really, not quite. But the film division really took a beating. Okay, point number 8, push and pull portrait. A lot of confusion about pushing and pulling. You are going to pay push and pull charges if you go to a lab, most likely. They're going to charge you, I'd say, $3 to $5 per roll for push or pull. So you may or may not want to do this. But very, very few people that I knew that were shooting professionally using portrait film, which at the time, that was the film, color negative film of choice. And when portrait came along, it shifted a lot of things. The industry was still in great part transparency based because negative films did not scan as well as transparency. But portrait came along and Kodak put a lot of technology into portrait to make it scan really well. So all of a sudden you had the latitude and the less expense of negative film, and photographers jumped all over it. But they're not shooting portrait 400 at 400. They were shooting it at 200. They were shooting it at 100. They were shooting it at 200 and pushing 2 stops. The same with the 160. They would rate it at 50 and then push it on top of that. What that does is change all the elements and aspects of that film. It changes primarily skin tone. It turns the skin tone into the most creamy, blotch-free, perfect skin tone that you've ever seen. That's why people did it. And so pushing and pulling film with negatives, again, not true to box speed. So overexposing like that is getting them closer to what that film was actually meant to look like. Just an interesting little side note. Okay, the next point is, I think, point 9 something, the truth about Kodak E100. This was so they re-released E100 or something a year or so ago, 8 months ago, I don't know. Kodak was like, hey, we're going to start making E100 again. I was shaking my head like, why? Because that was Kodak's attempt at replacing EPP, the film that everybody else tried to replace and couldn't do. Kodak tried to do it as well. And they spent a fortune. It was a huge campaign. And there was a lot of amazing things about E100. It was wonderful to see a company like Kodak really double down on film and try to do something different. There were aspects of this film that were incredibly cutting edge. There were great aspects to it. But EPP people looked at it and said, no, I'm not real happy. And there was E100S. There was E100SW, which was a saturated warm version, and then there was E100VS, which was the vivid saturation. And people sort of developed a look based on whatever their content was. If you're a celebrity portrait person, you're not shooting a warm film, you're not shooting a vivid film because the skin tone was too magenta, too red or yellow. Kodak films tended to be on the warm side, Fuji films on the cold side, and then you're processing it depending on what lab you used. Regions of the country had different looks. Northeast was a colder line. Hollywood was a warmer line based on the kinds of work. The Southeast did a lot of catalog and furniture stuff. Their lines looked totally different. So all of that factored in. E100 was not a film that I was particularly in love with. I thought some of the older films just had a better look and feel. But again, I loved grain. Grain for me was everything. I would take my TMAX 3200 to the lab and the owner would say, God, everybody's coming in here trying to get rid of their grain and you're coming in here and accentuating it. So go figure. Okay, let's wrap this thing up. One more time here, and I mentioned this before, but it deserves to be mentioned again. It's fun to talk about this stuff, right? Kodak film has such a fantastic history in photography. It's a lot of fun to dabble in this stuff and talk about it. But the truth is, unless you're using it to make photographs, it doesn't really matter. When I see people talking about film or showing film cameras or posting things, images that are just average, banal pictures, and there's so much thought and time put into, I shot it with this camera, at this aperture, with this film, and I look at that and I say, who cares? Learn how to make good, interesting, unique photographs. It's far more important than the dialogue about film. So a lot of people have reached out and said, are you going to continue to make films about film? And the short answer is, I don't know, because I'm not really sure what else there is to say about it. I probably will not, because the key for me is if I'm going to use film on a project, I'm not going to waste my time talking to you about the film itself. I want you to look at the photographs. I want you to see the story, understand the story. That's what I'm concerned about. So I'm old. I didn't come around when the photographers had their cameras pointed at themselves. I came around during a time when we had our cameras pointed into the world, and the fact of turning things around and filming ourselves like I'm doing right now, it's embarrassing. It's a little bit embarrassing. Thankfully, I'm on the second floor, and we've had flooding here in Maine today. So to even get into this room, I had to walk across about 6 inches of standing water. That has kept everyone else away, which means I can do this film in private and not feel like a complete tool. But I hope that was interesting and fun and maybe a little funny. And if you're using film, awesome. I'm glad you are, because I really, really, really hope it stays alive. I think film is a completely viable medium. I think it's beautiful. I love the fact it slows us down, and I love the limitations of film. Everything that people say is bad about film is actually what makes it so wonderful. I'll be back.